in much of the world, um, there aren't any laws uh, against domestic violence, or the laws that exist are not enforced. So in much of Africa, Asia, and South America, there are very few, if any, battered women's advocacy groups. Now, it's the case in most countries that rates of violence are very comparable. They just are. With few exceptions, domestic violence rates are about the same in China and most of the southern part of Africa, in the Caribbean, in many countries in Latin America. In the countries where research has been conducted and we know about the rates of violence, the rates of violence are generally comparable between men and women all over the world. In some countries, they're somewhat higher by men, okay? But you would think that in a place like Iran or Jordan, these highly patriarchal countries, that the rates of violence would be much higher by men. And they are somewhat higher by men, but not as high as you'd think. So basically, what that shows is that domestic violence is a human problem. And behind closed doors, women in Saudi Arabia and women in Iran hit their men and slap their men the way the men do. Now, here's the difference. Uh, if it's a patriarchal society and women don't have the same rights as men, then women are much more constrained in their ability to get help and to get justice legally, right? They're less likely to find protection when they're seriously in danger of being killed, for example. So I would say that if I was working in Iran, I would have a different approach to the way I discuss domestic violence. I would put a little bit more of an emphasis on the social factors. Because here in the United States and Canada, the women's liberation movement has had a great success. Women are generally not uh, facing the same kind of legal and social obstacles that they once did. Women can and do um, seek legal protection, and it's available to them. But so that's the caveat. No one's saying that social factors are not important. They are important, but not as important as battered women's advocates would say. I'll give you another example. It's assumed, not only in the United States, but especially in patriarchal countries, that most people approve of domestic violence. Not true. I've looked at the research. I know what the research says. In only one country, and that's, I think, Jordan, does a majority of the population approve of violence by the husband or the wife under certain circumstances. So if the question is it okay for a husband to slap his wife if she didn't cook him dinner on time? I think in Jordan, I think something like 48 or 50% of the people said, yeah, it's okay. But in majority of in almost every other country, it's somewhere around 10 to 30%. So like 10 to 30% of people think it's okay for for a husband to hit or slap his wife. And this is primarily in the really the most patriarchal countries. So even in the most patriarchal countries, vast majority of individuals don't believe that's okay. Now, let's separate attitudes about domestic violence and rates of domestic violence from the conditions of women in these countries. So the condition of women in these countries, some of these countries, is totally atrocious. It's abysmal. But here's the thing: in that article you referenced, I was just trying to show why is it that there's such a disparity between rates of violence in the home and outside the home. Because in the home, this is one area where women traditionally and all around the world feel is their domain. They have a vested interest. They have from an evolutionary perspective, um, women are going to defend their interests zealously in the home, the way that men defend their interests outside the home in competition with other men, in job seeking and in war and so forth. So, so if so, women tend to have certain assumptions. In the United States, for example, there's something called female privilege, which not all women subscribe to, but it's the equivalent to male privilege. So male privilege is, well, I'm the breadwinner, I'm the father. You should have my dinner ready. I don't want you working outside the home. You take care of the kids. I'll call the shots when it comes to how we spend our money and so forth. Well, female privilege is, I'm the mom. I know better. I'll take care of the kids. If we get divorced, I'll get the kids. If I hit you, it should be okay because you're a guy and you can take it. By the way, I want a bigger house with more bedrooms, so I want you to get another job. And if you cross me and I divorce you, I'll show the court that because you haven't been around and you've been working 3 jobs for me, you're not a fit father, and I'll take the kids, and then you'll pay incredible child support to support me the rest of my life. Now, I'm being a little facetious, but there are actually, lots of women who have that mentality, right? So, so in the home, women have more of an interest in maintaining their privilege than men do. I'm not saying all women think that way or act that way. My wife certainly doesn't. Um, but but that's one explanation for why you find high rates of violence in the home all around the world. Let me say one more thing. I've given a lot of thought to this topic, and especially when I was researching domestic violence worldwide, and I was quite amazed at the high rates of violence against men worldwide. And then it occurred to me, sometimes the best way to understand domestic violence is just to kind of like get your head out of the books and just use your common sense. Just use your common sense. Like, why aren't there more men beating the hell out of their wives in Pakistan when they can? Like, they can't, right? The laws are really not enforced. So why can't a guy in Pakistan just beat his wife mercilessly every day? Because it's not in his interest to do so. First of all, if you think that, or if you even propose that question, you're assuming that most men or all men are violent or have violent tendencies, which is wrong. So the average man in Pakistan is a nice guy who just wants to, get along with his wife. And it's not in his interest to hurt his wife because then she's going to withdraw love. His self-respect will suffer. His children will hate his guts. There's a price to be paid for being violent. And the assumption by some of these feminists and battered women's advocates is that men are just inherently violent. Give them any opportunity to be violent, and they're going to be violent. And that's such an absurd, in many ways degrading kind of point of view. So those of us who, question the gender paradigm point these things out. These are just the facts. Around the world, most people don't approve of domestic violence. Women are violent all around the world for the same reason as women in the United States. It's to defend their interests in the home. It's their way of exercising their power in countries where they can't exercise their power in other ways. It's just really quite simple.